Welcome to our emergency evacuation training. In this video, we're going to be looking at the key steps to evacuate safely out of an early childhood service in the event of an emergency. Emergency evacuations and lockdowns are part of our roles as early childhood educators, and emergencies can happen at any time in a service. So being aware of what your responsibilities are and the service's expectations of you during those times is essential. Service is required to have policies and procedures, and it's the policies and procedures that will guide educators to know what it is that they're required to do and how they are expected to do the tasks. Every service will create their own policies and procedures because each service's needs will be different and unique. So, for example, preschool won't have infants, and so they won't have to manage evacuating groups of infants who may not be walking to an assembly point, whereas a long day care will. And so they may have things like emergency cots, which we'll talk about later, which allow us to transport small groups of children safely to an emergency evacuation point. The policies and procedures purpose is to ensure the safety of everybody. That includes children, staff, and any visitors that may be on site during the evacuation. An evacuation or an emergency could happen at any time in the service. The children might be busy playing, you might have parents doing drop-off, you might be in the middle of a routine like sleep time and meal time. So being prepared to respond in any type of emergency at any time during the day is essential. There are many different roles that need to happen during an emergency evacuation, and these will be outlined in your service policies and procedures. Some of the types of roles that need to happen during an evacuation will be things such as who will gather the emergency evacuation bag, who will gather the attendance for the day. So there might be a digital attendance, which is usually an iPad or something like that with an app on it that collects the children's names, staff names, and any visitors' names that might be on site at that time, or it might be a hard copy attendance, so pen and paper where you mark off. We'll also have to consider things like medication. So parents may have signed in medication for the day. This needs to be brought with us to the evacuation point, or there may be long-term medications, asthma, EpiPens, things like that. So those things will also need to be gathered and brought to the emergency evacuation point. They'll also highlight in our policies and procedures, how do we respond in different situations? So, for example, if there was a fire or smoke, that might be a very different way of responding than if it was, say, a chemical spill or a gas leak, or maybe an intruder where we need to go to a lockdown. So our policies will highlight how to respond in different situations. In the event of a lockdown, we may find that our policy will also guide us on things like there may be a code word or something like that that's shared amongst staff to know that we're going into a lockdown. The regulations are our legal obligations. We must ensure that we are meeting these at all times during an emergency procedure. The regulations state that we must have floor plans. Having evacuation floor plans show where the evacuation points are and the different routes to safely evacuate. We will make sure that these are displayed in a prominent position. There may be more than one route. So depending on where the hazard is, for example, if there was a fire in the foyer, it will mean that it's not safe to exit from that point, and you may need to go to the back of the building instead, and vice versa. If there was a hazard in the back, you would exit from the front. The maps will also show exit points, the location of emergency equipment such as extinguishers, and where the assembly points are. Services will need to have a plan on how they will evacuate non-ambulatory children. So, for example, infants or non-walkers or children with disabilities. In the case of long day care services, you'll probably find that a lot of these are using the emergency evacuation cots. These allow us to transport groups of young children. So we could put 3 or 4 children in the cot and wheel them out to the assembly point safely, which is a lot safer than educators trying to carry and guide children and carry backpacks and things like that all at the one time. There are other devices as well. So there are things like pram wagons. So they look a little bit like, some of them look a little bit like the ones that you see at the beach, except they will have harnesses in them for the children to be strapped into. So there are a lot of different types of devices that you could use to be able to evacuate non-walking children safely. Staff need to be trained on how to use the emergency equipment. So that might be the emergency rope where children gather and hold onto the rope to evacuate all together. That could be the emergency cots, knowing how to use the braking system. That could be the fire extinguishers. The regulations also state that emergencies and lockdowns need to be practiced and rehearsed every 3 months. What you'll find in a service is the week that they're scheduled to be practiced, you'll probably do them multiple times through the week. And that's to allow children who might only attend 1 or 2 days a week to still participate in the evacuation. Services will create their own strategies to support them to evacuate safely. One of the strategies that is quite common is an emergency evacuation bag. So these are bags created by the service to contain the things that they need to evacuate the children safely and to keep them occupied during that time. You might be out of the service for 15 minutes during a drill, which is not too much, but you might be out for several hours if it's a real evacuation. So having the resources that you need to keep children safe and to keep them engaged during that time is really important. So you'll see in our image here that we have a range of different things. This is our play session emergency evacuation bag. So we have a range of things to help us evacuate safely. Services may choose to put different types of things in there depending on their own needs. During an evacuation, an educator's ability to engage children through familiar songs or simple games or stories is really important to be able to do. You're not always going to have a lot of resources with you when you evacuate. So although we might have a few maybe books and things like that in a bag, you may have a lot of children out at the evacuation point. So having a little resource of games and songs and things that you can recall quickly is a really helpful strategy to have. These sorts of activities can help children to feel safe and secure. It can help them to redirect their attention during a time that might be normally quite stressful for them. So it's a comforting thing that we can provide for children. There will be stages to an evacuation. So these are the key steps that have to happen, and they will be highlighted in your policies and procedures. The first thing that will happen is the alarm will go off. So you'll be notified that the evacuation or the emergency is occurring, or it could be the code word or a communication system to say you're going into a lockdown. The second step is to immediately evaluate according to the floor plan. So if the emergency is happening in the front, we exit from the back. So that will be on our floor plan to tell us where we need to exit and the route that we need to take. We then gather at the assembly point. Once we're all together at the assembly point, we need to do a roll call and to check for children, visitors, and staff. And then once we've gathered, we've done our roll call, it's the communication phase. So if it is a real emergency, someone needs to contact the emergency services, and then we also need to contact the parents and guardians of the children to notify them that the emergency is occurring. If it is a drill, the nominated supervisor or the responsible person for the day will let us know that it's safe to re-enter the service. If it is a real evacuation, we have to get clearance from emergency services to enter in the building, as there might be things like structural damage or electrical hazards. And the final thing that needs to happen after an evacuation or a lockdown is our evaluation and reflection. So this is an opportunity for us to reflect on what worked well, any challenges or delays, staff role effectiveness, areas for improvement, and if there's anything that needs to be updated in our policies and procedures. That concludes our training for today on emergency evacuations. Thank you for joining me, and goodbye.